Welcome to the 100th Monkey Radio with Tom and Ramon. Wow, you know, we are recording this on the 29th, and the world is, the weather here in the U.S. is just absolutely going crazy. There's that Hurricane Sandy that's threatening the East Coast, and our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody over there. And you know, just if you're experiencing that, keep the faith, and remember there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Trust your spirit to guide you, and you'll be exactly where you need to be.
Well, it's hitting New York, and New York is a tough guys, you know?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
In my old hometown. Yeah, it's so we didn't do any news coverage. You don't have anything in the news, do you, Tom?
Nah, that's all right. There's plenty going on out right now that we don't need to add to it. We're actually, this is going to air. Everybody's probably cleaning up, so hopefully their cleanup is going really well.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've heard, you know, a lot of rumors about this, and just want to get your gut feeling on the air before this happens. Some people think that this is going to be the storm that stops the election. What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is that it's going to definitely impact. It's going to impact the amount of people that turn out to the polls. My gut feeling is that our elections are not quite as upfront as they're supposed to be, and I don't think it makes that much difference in the first place. But I mean, I think on a local level, our election process still works. You know, I truly believe that on a local level it still works. But as far as once you get up into those categories, I think it's more of a selection process than an election process. I mean, why do we have a debate? They put, you know, the nationally televised debate is two candidates, you know? What the heck's that? There's, 7 running for president? 7 or 8? And, you know, come on. How about putting them up there? But, oh well.
Yeah, you get...
You know, I personally, and I'll put this on the record too, I think that this hurricane that's getting ready to hit over there, I think there's going to be much less damage and disaster, et cetera, than all the hype has been building it up to be. So, you know, I don't know if it hits the shore and just peters out, you know, gives them some 70, 80 mile an hour winds and then goes away tomorrow. I don't know, but I think it's going to be a lot less than what they're hyping it to be. So.
Yeah. So you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and I just want to say something about our guest before you introduce him. When I first heard this guest, I was really amazed, and I don't think we've ever done a full show on reincarnation and past lives, and you know, he's done an amazing job just researching it. So it just goes to show you that if you want to find something out, go research it. Don't believe what anybody else tells you. So, Tom?
What happens after we die? Author and award-winning filmmaker Richard Martini explores startling new evidence of life after death via The Life Between Lives, where we reportedly return to find our loved ones, soulmates, and spiritual teachers. Based on the evidence of thousands who claim under deep hypnosis they experience the same basic things about the afterlife, the book interviews hypnotherapists trained in the method pioneered by Dr. Michael Newton, as well as actual between-life sessions. The author goes on the same journey with startling and candid results, learning we are fully conscious between lives, return to connect with loved ones and spiritual soulmates, and together choose how and when we will reincarnate. Karmic law is trumped by free will, with souls choosing difficult lives in order to learn from their spirituality. Life choices appear to be made in advance, with the help of loved ones, soulmates, and wise elders. Extensively researched, breathtaking in scope, Flipside, which is, oh my God, fantastic movie, takes the reader into a new territory. I haven't read the book yet, but the movie makes me want it. Boldly going where no author has gone before to tie up the various disciplines of past life regression, near-death experiences, and between-life exploration. Welcome to the show, Rich Martini.
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Oh, we are doing fantastic. Love to have you here. You know, Ramon mentioned...
Well, I'm really honored to be. Yeah, I'm honored to be here, guys. You know, it's a stressful day on the East Coast, as we know. But hopefully, by the time they do dry out, they'll be able to sit down and tune into your show and put their feet up, have a cup of tea, and contemplate why they survived.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. You know, Ramon mentioned that we hadn't really done a full show on reincarnation and past life, and that's true. And this is a subject that I have been very, very interested in for quite a few years. I feel as if I personally have had glimpses of past lives myself in my meditations. And, you know, I have not done that, the regression therapy yet, but that's definitely intriguing. So what actually brought you into, well, you're a filmmaker primarily before you got into this?
Yeah, basically. And like you know, we go through life and we have odd things happen to us. Like you said, you know, in some of your meditations, you sort of had a glimpse of something. You know, was it? Who knows? And we have a tendency to dismiss those things. My whole life, I've had odd experiences with ghosts, let's say, you know, where I, you know, living somewhere, an old hotel or something, and I would, you know, feel some presence come into the room, sit on the bed, whatever. But because it didn't bother me, I never made a big thing out of it. And, but, you know, so I'm traipsing through life, and then a very close friend of mine, who I'd met as a filmmaker out here, I met this actress, and we became really close. And as she lay dying, she was telling me she had breast cancer, and she checked out in 1996. Her name is Luana Anders. And so Lou was saying to me one day, you know, I think I'm going to another galaxy when I die. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I have this current dream where I'm in this other dimension, and I'm in a classroom, and everyone is dressed in white, and they're speaking a language I'd never heard before, but I somehow completely understand. And I thought, okay, well, that's the morphine drip talking. You know, I can't imagine what that means. But then the night she passed away, a close friend of hers who was also a healer, lives in Hawaii, named is Sandra Stevenson. She called me and said, I had the most amazing dream about Luana. And she was in the fourth dimension, she said, in a classroom, everyone dressed in white. And I thought to myself, classrooms in the afterlife. Hey, you know, we go through class most of our lives. Do I really want to be, you know, going to class in the afterlife? But I set it aside as a concept, like, well, what does that mean? What is that? And then I moved to New York, you know, where the storm is happening, and I was working on the Charles Grodin show, a friend of mine, when he had me producing the show with him and other people. But one night, I was in my apartment in upper Manhattan, Upper West Side, and I had an out-of-body experience, a classic out-of-body experience, floating around. But instead of just floating around the room, I shot off into outer space. which I've never done before. But I saw New York disappear below me, like, you know, something out of a movie. And then I was like flying through space, and I saw myself going past planets, but really going so fast that stars were like melting around me. Light was melting, you know. And then suddenly I was going through some kind of a wormhole, and that's all I can describe it, because I was bouncing around. And when I got on the other side, I was still going at this incredible rate, but instead of going forward, I was going like left to right. That's all I can describe it. And then I stopped, and there she was. She had passed away in 96. This was a year later. And there she was, standing in front of me. And she had her eyes closed, and she opened her eyes as if to say, you wanted to know where I am. Here I am. And then some idiot outside the window honked his horn. That's Ramon will know, noisy city that New York is. And before the guy's hand came off the horn, I traveled back into my body like a rubber band.
Right.
So if you can imagine how fast that traveling would have been to go from deep space into my body was, you know, a split second. So, you know, when I got up out of bed, I was like, what was that? And of course, I could have just dismissed it and said, well, that was nothing. It was a dream. But I thought, well, it felt real. It felt like I was standing in front of her. So even if it's some kind of relative reality, what is it? And if she exists somewhere in the stratosphere, how do you get there without benefit of a flight suit? And the movie Contact hadn't come out, by the way. But when I watched Contact, I was like, oh, well, that was the experience I had. But anyway, so I started studying the afterlife, because that's what my first trip was, let's say. You know, I started studying actually Tibetan philosophy. I took some classes at Columbia with Robert Thurman, who'd written a book, you know, or a creation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, because, you know, their culture and their philosophy kind of deals with it. Buddhism deals with the afterlife in a very specific manner. But it didn't ring true to what my experience was, what their description was, you see. So I kept sort of down that path. But then I had some amazing adventures with Thurman. We went to Tibet together. I shot a documentary in India and Tibet, and which all is important, because now when I finally stumbled upon somebody who had been researching the afterlife intensely for 50 years, and Michael Newton. I stumbled across his work in a very kismet way, and I thought, and I opened up his first book, Journey of Souls, which he published in 1994, and the first account he was talking about of someone, not only a past life, but a between life session, I'll explain that in a second, was this person saying, I'm in a classroom in the afterlife and everyone is dressed in white. So when I read that, I realized, oh, this is where I'm supposed to follow. This is the path I'm supposed to go on to find out how do you get to those classrooms? Because obviously he knew one of his clients was able to do that. So I read all of his books. He's got 4. And then I went and found out he's retired. He doesn't do these sessions anymore. But he was given a conference in Chicago where they train people, and I asked them if I could come and film a conference, and they said yes, much to my surprise. They told me that Michael wouldn't do an interview, but, you know, I could come and watch and film. And so I got there and met Michael, and I said, you know, I'd really like to interview you. And he said, people have been coming to me my whole life to say they're going to make a movie or a documentary about my research. Nobody's ever done it. Why are you going to be different? I just said, well, because I'm here, and I will do it. So, I mean, it took me 5 years, but, you know, I did it. So I interviewed him, and basically here's what Michael had to say, and this is what jumped me into my research. He basically was a skeptic in the true sense of the word. You know, skeptic means somebody who doesn't believe in the prevailing school of thought. So, like him, I was a skeptic. And the point of view that he had was that there is no past life regression. It doesn't exist. It's a waste of time. And this is when he was practicing in Los Angeles in the 1950s. And there was the famous Bridie Murphy case. Woman claimed to have been born in Ireland and had been reborn. And it was a big, Maury Bernstein wrote a book. It was a big, you know, to-do. Time magazine covered it. So he started getting calls from people who said, I want to do that. I want to do a past life regression. And he said, I don't believe in it. It's not my thing. And then one day he had a client came in with a shoulder problem, psychosomatic problem, shoulder pain. Nobody could find out what the cause of it was. So while he's doing a hypnosis session with this guy, he said, take me to the onset of this pain. Where did it begin? And the guy suddenly said, oh, I'm in a trench. It's World War I. I'm a British officer, and I'm being stabbed in the back by a German soldier. Now, Newton, because he didn't believe in it, grilled this poor guy who was there writhing in pain, but he's there trying to say, well, what's your regiment? What's your mother's maiden name? All these details that he wanted to get out of
As the guy has a bayonet.
And ultimately, but ultimately he did, with an ab reaction, as they call it, and then the guy called the next day and said, hey, I'm fine, thank you, you cured me. But Newton still stuck in his craw, and he wrote to the British War Museum and sent them the details and said, did this guy exist? And they wrote back and said, yes, he did. He was in the 4th Corps, it was blah, blah, blah. So he verified the details. And so as a result of that, Newton started seeing more past life regressions, similar to the way Brian Weiss, the guy who wrote Many Lives, Many Masters,
right,
kind of thing, where he had a client spontaneously, he's a Yale psychiatrist, spontaneously, remembered a past life and cured her illness, lifelong illness. So Newton started seeing past life regressions. And somewhere in the late 60s, a woman came in and said her presenting problem was loneliness. So in a session, he said, let's go to the source of your pain. Let's go to the source of where, especially if a crowd was involved, other people. And she said, oh, I see. I'm here with my soul group. I can see everybody in my soul group. And we all agreed not to be together in this lifetime. So I'm fine now. I understand it. I'm going to see them later. And Newton said, wait a minute. Where are we? When is this happening? Did this happen before? Or is this the future? What is this? And she said, no, it's now. I'm physically with them now. I'm sitting with them, and I can see them all. And Newton, as he said, this was like a cold splash of water in his face. Here was a guy who didn't believe in past life regression, and now this woman was saying that there's a life between lives that we can access during this life, fully conscious lifetime. So he basically closed his practice, and for the next 30 years, interviewed people who could take him to this place and grilled them with questions. He didn't publish for 30 years. He didn't tell anybody. Avoided bookstores for fear of the title might influence this question, which is a startling thing to say. So when he said all this stuff in my interview, and by the way, it's the last one he's ever going to give. He's retired in his 80s, and he's done with media. But, he said, I'll give you one last interview. After the interview, I interviewed his wife because she was there, and she's a nurse. And, I thought, well, this is a good way to corroborate some of the stuff he's saying. And I said, so what did you feel like when your husband came home and said, about this research? And she said, I thought they were going to take him away. I thought, my husband had gone off the deep end. She said, until I heard the tapes. And once she heard the tapes, she realized all these different people from all these different walks of life saying the same things under hypnosis. We're talking about thousands of people under deep hypnosis over the course of 25 to 30 years saying the same things about the afterlife. Now, when I heard her say that thing about tapes, I thought, well, there you go. That's what I need. I need to create my own tapes. I need to film people doing this. And so I asked them, can I film some of the conference? And they said, yeah, sure. So I started filming people under deep hypnosis, and I'm startled because they were saying the exact same thing I had read. And then they offered me my own session, and I was equally startled, and we can get into that in a minute. But then I started picking people at random, people I knew who were skeptics, people I knew who were from different religious backgrounds, people I knew who believed definitively they could never be hypnotized. And they all said the same things,
wow,
basically. And it's a pretty startling thing because it's a series of questions that a hypnotherapist, now, by the way, the Newton Institute, they created an institute, and I think it's based in New York, and online it's newtoninstitute.org, and there you can find a Newton-trained hypnotherapist somewhere near you. They're all over the world. The reason I recommend what they do is not only because I've been filming them, but because these are like tour guides who've been to the place you want to go. So they've had quite a good deal of experience. Let's say you want to go to Tibet. These guys have been there. So they've been there, and they know that and this is the misnomer about hypnosis, and this is why, most science considers hypnosis not a valid scientific tool, because it's been proven that you can lead someone in hypnosis to where you want them to go.
Right.
That's the case with quite a few famous cases here in California where, people thought they were being molested, et cetera, and it wasn't the case. The therapist was leading them.
Right, leading questions.
I've filmed these sessions, and the therapist doesn't lead you anywhere. You do the leading. They ask a series of questions. We're going to go to a previous life, some significance on this life. And that's up to you to say yes or no. You can say, no, we're not doing that. But they say, where are we? And they say, are we inside or outside? Are we young or are we old? Are we a boy or a girl? What age? What year is this? And what's interesting is your spirit, your energy, your spirit guides, they know what's happening. They know that you're lying down because you're fully conscious. They know you're lying down on a couch. And so when you ask the question, what year is this of a previous lifetime, they know that they're talking to you. So you get the image or the sound of a certain, or you see a number sometimes of the date. And, in my own case, now I can just speak. So I've, been filming that for the past 5 years, and I've continued since the book was published and since the film was done. I'm still, it's like addictive, too interesting to stop. But in my own case, and I can speak to you about myself. Isn't it always the case in Hollywood? People don't talk about themselves. But in this particular case, when they offered me my own session, at first I thought, well, that's going to change the outcome because I've already read all the books. But how could I turn it down? Because I have to take the same adventure. And then I thought, well, this is a perfect good time for me to prove it's false. Because I'm going to be led down a path. I've not gone to them with a presenting problem, you see. I'm just, Joe Blow off the street. And so before I went to the session, I wrote up a list of questions because they asked me to bring like 10 questions you might ask, whatever they are,
Right.
You had a conversation with God, let's say. What are the 10 questions you'd ask her, him, whatever. So I wrote out these 10 questions. I threw in a ringer. I threw in a question that I knew no one could guide me to on the planet. Only I know the answer to it. Okay? I thought that was clever. And then I went to this session, and it was 4 to 5 hours, about 4.5 hours, with a guy named Jimmy Quast. He's in Maryland. He's the guy who actually does the sessions. He does all the training and the accreditation for the Newton Institute. So he's good. And we went, basically they spend the first half an hour going through your current life, to get you to talk. And you talk about incidents that happened when you were a kid. And I thought it was interesting because as I was referring to an incident when I was 11, I could feel the emotion of that incident as it happened to me when I was 11. But filtered like, an 11-year-old's emotion. Like I saw my dad come out of the garage to help me. I'd cut my hand. And my dad had passed away. So, the act of seeing him and feeling like, oh, Dad's going to save me. So I felt it. I thought, well, this is interesting. I can actually, as we can, when you do these sessions, tap into something from your past. And then we went back. He goes, let's go to your first memory. And I, startled, said, I'm being born. And I could feel, that process of coming from the warmth into the cold, into the light.
Wow.
And being held up by the doctor and looking at the doctor's face.
Wow.
As clear as a bell. I could see this guy's hazel eyes, and I could see that metal plate they used to wear back in the 50s, you know, and the mask on, and he's looking at me. And I look at him, and I said, you know, my dad's not here right now, but he's on his way here. Now, I didn't know that, and after the session, I called my mom and said, you know, where's Dad when I was born? Oh, he was driving there. And then they say, okay, let's go to a previous life and have some influence on this life. And I determined not to say anything other than, no, I don't see anything. Nope. It's dark. You know, I'm not seeing a thing. And then this is one of the things they do, clever. He says to me, just look down. And I look down, and I see my feet naked in a creek. And they're bloody, like I've been running through, you know, bushes or something. And then he says, what are you wearing? And then it's almost like in a film. I start to pull back, and I see myself wearing buckskin. And then I laugh, because I'm a screenwriter. I've worked in movies my whole life, you know, so I'm like, oh, I've kept myself, that's what I'm thinking, right? I've kept myself as an American Indian. I say I'm a Lakota Sioux medicine man. He says, what's your name? I say, it sounds like the Tonka. Now, I saw Dances with Wolves.
Mm-hmm.
The Tonka in Lakota means buffalo. And my brain is saying, you must be making this up. You're just pulling this out of the Kevin Costner movie.
Yeah.
But the one thing they ask you to do is not to edit while you're talking. Just let yourself talk. You can always listen to it later and see if it's being acted now. And then he said, let's go to your tribe. And I said, oh, I just really don't do that right now. And then I saw why. And I said, because everyone's been massacred. And I saw this village, and I saw everybody lying there dead. And then he said, who did this? And I thought, oh, I'm going to probably say the Bluecoats. But instead I said, oh, it was the goddamn Huron. Mm-hmm. And then my, you know, conscious mind said, Huron? They're in upstate New York. You know, the Sioux are in Montana. That, you know, you're really talking out of your hat here. But I just let it be what it was. And then he asked me to go to the last day of this life. And I saw my walking along the Mississippi River, an old man carrying a bottle of whiskey. And I had just finished it, and I walked into the river and just let myself float away. And I said, I'm killing myself. And the therapist said, oh, you know, that's just a sad occasion. I'm sorry. I said, no, it's not sad at all. I'm a shell of a human. They've taken everything from me. My people, my culture, my religion, everything that I loved is gone. And I said it with that emotion. I thought to myself, wow, this is dramatic. Oh, and by the way, when I was there looking at my dead tribe, I opened up a teepee. You know, I felt myself open up this flap, and I saw a woman lying on the ground with black hair and her throat cut and blood coming out of her. And I said, they've killed my wife, and they've taken my son. Now, there was no son there, but I said it. And I said it with the emotion of what that sentence would feel for anybody experiencing it.
Right.
And as I started to sob, I was thinking to myself, wow, this is really intense. If I'm making this up, why am I feeling this? Feeling this depth of this emotion. All right. Now let me just skip down. About 6 months later, I was at a funeral of one of my dear aunt in Wisconsin, and I'm sitting at a table, and I start talking to one of my cousins, and he says, well, I'm a historian. Really? I didn't know that. Yeah, Lakota Sioux. I'm an historian of their tribe. They've actually made me an honorary member. I was like, what? Oh, my God, I had no idea. Well, let me tell you about this life regression I had. And he puts his hand up and says, hold on a second, just tell me, what were you wearing? And I said, well, I was wearing buckskin. He said, did you have feathers? I said, yeah. He said, were they up or were they down? I said, they were down. He said, well, that means you were a medicine man. I said, oh, well, that's funny because that's what I said I was. I said, but I said my name was Watanka, which sounds like Tatanka. And he said, well, that makes total sense because that's what they call their medicine men. Wakantanka means great spirit.
Huh.
So it's a derivation of Wakantanka. So Watanka would be your medicine man. Now, I couldn't look that up. I couldn't find it. So then I said, well, wait a minute. Why would I say that the Huron killed my tribe? And he said, because sitting in the spot where they fought for 60 years, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Detail I couldn't look. I really had to research it to find that detail out.
Wow.
So it couldn't have been cryptomnesia, which is what science considers past life regression. So, but the point about the book and the point about this research isn't about past lives. Past lives are the gateway to get into the life between lives. It's not so much that, you remember being a life on the Titanic, let's say. The question is, why did you choose a life on the Titanic? Why did you choose this life? And what do the two have in common? And that's what you find out through this research, because what they'd say is, let's go to the last day of that life. This is like into hour number 2. They say, let's go to the last day of that previous life, and you go there. And if it's a stressful moment, they'll say, let's hover. Let's go to the day before, or let's go to the day after. And they ask you, where would you like to go now? Where do you feel yourself going now? And everybody, almost everybody, says, I want to go home. Which I said, by the way, when the American Indian died, he said, where do you want to go now? I said, I want to go home. And home ain't here. Home is over there. Home is back there. And when you get back there, you have a soul group between 3 and 25 people. The average is 15. You have a spirit guide. Everybody has one. Some people have 2 or more for various reasons, but basically we all have one. They keep an eye on us through all of our lifetime. And they then, once you get into this journey, they take you to these places. They take you to visit your soul group. They'll take you to a classroom if you want. They take you to I went to a healing center. I saw my Indian wife and son, who I mentioned, out back there. And then there's a council of elders that people go to. And the elders are like sort of wise, older people who help guide you through all your lifetimes. There's anywhere from 6 to 12 normally on your council, and these are really, they're non-reincarnating individuals who have been watching over you forever, and they can help you learn things. And there's no judgment back there of negativity. You judge yourself negatively. So when you go back and have a past life review, you say, oh, geez, I wish I hadn't done that to that particular person. And you experience maybe the pain that you've engendered for other individuals. But they're not giving you the pain. So it's very controversial what I'm saying, and I just want to reiterate, this is not a philosophy or a belief. This is just reports of what people under deep hypnosis.
Right.
So, I've been talking.
Oh, this is all good stuff. Just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. You laid down some.
Okay. Well, all right. So, do you want to go into my my trip to my council?
Yeah. Absolutely. Continue on, and then we'll. And I know Ramon and I want to do some probing here.
Okay. Great. Sure. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to say that 2 years after I did this session, I did another one with a different therapist in a different city. I thought that was key because I wanted to, A, confirm everything I'd been saying, and B, see if I could go deeper, and I did. And that's the last chapter in the book. It's like 50 pages, but it's very intense. I spoke for 6 hours nonstop. You can imagine I'm talking now for imagine me talking for 6. The poor therapist, Scott DeTamble, his website, lightbetweenlives.com, here in California. Terrific hypnotherapist. And he spent 6 hours, guiding me and helping me answer questions that I had. So I was able to do that deeper, richer experience. Now, one other thing I'd like to point out, when I said I had a sort of serendipitous journey to Michael Newton's work, it came because a guy from my hometown called me out of the blue. There is no such thing as out of the blue. But he called me out of the blue and said, I'm in London. I want you to come here and pitch this TV show with me. We're going to do a TV show on cell phones. And I'm flying you over to London, and we're ready to go. So come up with a good idea. You'll be here Monday. So I got to London, and it turned out there wasn't a show. He was he was shooting in the dark. Sweetheart guy, Chuck Tibbett. Bless his heart. But, he was aiming for a show. But he introduced me to a close friend of his named Robert Beer, Oxford professor. And when I shook Robert's hand, I had the profound feeling, sometimes you have, oh, this is why I'm here, to meet this guy. So for the next 6 months, we corresponded back and forth, just as friends. And then he wrote me this awful email. His daughter had died. She was 18. She was out, scuba diving in Scotland, and she died. And it was easily the most painful, difficult day of his life. And so as a friend, I was trying to find some way to console him, and I suggested he read Carol Bowman's book, which is called Children's Past Lives. She worked with Ian Stevenson, who at the University of Virginia had been studying, reincarnation for 20, 30 years from a scientific point of view. And by the way, it came from there. I just spoke to 10 different scientists there at the University of Virginia about my research, sort of try to talk them into doing some scientific studies. But anyways, so I lost my train. Let's get back on the train. Where was I?
So you had
let's see if you guys are paying attention.
The guy had passed away. I mean, I'm sorry. The guy from Oxford University's daughter had passed away, and you recommended.
Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you. All right, we're back to Robert Beer. I'm sorry. My apologies. Not enough cappuccino today. But
we are paying attention.
So I wrote him about Carol Bowman's book, and Robert wrote me back and said, read Michael Newton's book. So that's how Michael Newton came into my life. And when I read the book, I then, like I said, I got to make a documentary about this guy, and I went to Chicago and I did the thing, and now I've done a session. And after the session is done, I write to Robert and say, Robert, you have turned me on to something that's really remarkable, and I think you can see your daughter there if you do a session. So he found a Newton-trained therapist in London, and he went and did a session, and he spent an hour with his daughter. And it was,
wow.
He told me afterwards that he had gone to some really famous psychics. In England, they have a tradition of not charging for that kind of talent. So he went to some really reputable, but they couldn't help him. And so he spent an hour with his daughter. And all I can say is it was as if she was there holding his hand and telling him things. No different than you and I might have a real experience. I'm just saying the reality for him is the same. So you could argue, what's the difference? But beyond that, though, in his past life review, his past life regression, he saw himself as a banker living in Boston in the 1840s. And he told me about a relationship that he had in the woman that he was married to in this past life regression, okay, is somebody he knows in this life. Let's call her Elizabeth. She lives on the East Coast of the United States. Now, Robert had never been to Boston, but I went to school there, and he described it quite accurately in his session. But when he was done with it, I said, are you still friends with her? He said, yeah. I said, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to prove or disprove this. Let's arrange for Elizabeth to have a Michael Newton-trained therapist do a life between life session with her somewhere else. Don't tell her anything about your session, but we'll have her do her own session. And so I did. I arranged that. Therapist knew nothing about his session, knew nothing about the motivation and why I was calling him. I just said, I've got somebody who wants to do a session. And she had the identical past life memory.
Wow.
Of being married to this guy in Boston in the 1840s. So that's a point that you can't give it, when I went to the University of Virginia recently, their argument to me was, first, hypnosis is not a valid tool because of cryptomnesia, blah, 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 blah. And I said, you're right. It never has been because of the way you guys do it. You put somebody in the couch and you direct them. Well, this is the opposite. They get on the couch and they direct you, and they do it over 6 hours, and sometimes over 2 or 3 days, and sometimes over many sessions. And they all have the same results. That doesn't make any sense. how could they have the same results? And so they said, well, maybe it's the Jungian method, which, Jung is still considered one of their icons, but the Jungian concept that there's an unconscious that exists out there, like is almost like a repository of memories and dreams and reflections. They're all out there, and you're just tapping into somebody else's. And I said, well, but that doesn't account for Robert Beer having this same past life memory with somebody else. You see?
Wait, but
couldn't be.
Even that, I was gonna say, even what you just said about what they said, even that still proves it, because if they're out there tapping into this subconscious, you're still proving your point. Do you know what I mean?
Agree. But when you're sitting in a room of jaded scientists with their eyebrows raised,
I grew up around.
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry. Back to your point.
Well, and listen, they're really wonderful guys, and they take a lot of flack for what their studies are, because they're in the medical school, and here they are studying ESP, they're studying near-death experience, they're studying reincarnation. They're using university funds and private funds to study these things from a scientific point of view. And I come along and say, hey, guys, it's all the same thing. It's all consciousness that comes from a different realm, and it comes here, and we inhabit this lifetime for a certain amount of time. We think it's long, but the way a fruit fly only lives for 24 hours, when the fruit fly looks at us, they consider us eternal gods because we live forever.
Right.
To them. So we have the same experience when we look at, it's just a matter of perspective. And what they say, here's some of the really profound things that they say. That life doesn't begin until the 4th month, which I was like, what? And I got to many, many, many different sessions. And what it is that your energy doesn't show up until the 4th month of birth. The reason for that is, as they say it, there's nothing to do. There's no brain to come and have it and meld yourself with. So
that makes too much sense.
If somebody loses a child before, but then there's also the case of people losing children afterwards. So what's that about? Well, everything happens for a reason. So I had this dialectical discussion with a Tibetan monk that I know, and he said, because in Buddhism they believe karma dictates your rebirth. And by the way, the research shows that we don't reincarnate as animals, only as humans, that the animals have their own realm. Animals of the air, of the land, and of the sea have their own realms that reincarnate. Very close to what the American Indians used to say about the buffalo realm. Anyway, what were we going to say?
So are you saying that like an eagle could go to a swallow and vice versa type
That's
thing?
Correct.
That's correct. Like
and
all the fish would, all the those in the sea.
A minnow can go to a whale. And in fact, my kid one day when we lost when we lost our beta fish, she went, "Oh, he's a whale now." So yes, that I'm just, this is the reports of what people say.
Okay.
And so the dialectic argument that I had with the former Tibetan monk was, he said, "Are you telling me that I would choose a life where I was born HIV positive in the poorest country in Africa?" And I said, which one of those concepts is negative?
Yep.
Listen, if you have 1,000, Tom and Ramon, if you have 1,000 of them, and I say to you, "Can you give me one? I need you to give me one where I want to help you teach compassion to people. You're only going to live for 6 months. But everyone that takes care of you is going to learn the pain and how difficult that is. It's going to be hard for you, but it's only 6 months. Do you think you could do that?" And my point is, that's the height of compassion, to sacrifice a life so others can learn how to deal with suffering. It's pretty controversial what I'm saying. So,
right.
Before I get into my session, the first session that I filmed was at this conference in Chicago. They had invited me in, and I set my camera up, and put my sound equipment up and a couple lights up, and they introduced me. And there was a class of about 100 therapists who had come from around the world to learn this technique, and they were going to do a live demonstration. So the woman who offered to do the demonstration is a hypnotherapist from Arizona, and the president of the institute, Paul Orand, A-U-R-A-N-D, he's in New York. Highly recommend him as well. He conducted the session, and Michael Newton sat off to the side and wrote notes on a big whiteboard, like notice how he repeats everything she says, okay? So this woman spoke of a pretty normal life growing up. I think it was in upstate New York. And now he says, let's go to a significant lifetime. And I interviewed her afterwards, and she said she had never had this past life ever before. And I've talked to her much since then. And she went to a gas chamber in Auschwitz. And she was there naked, her head was shaved, and she was waiting for the gas to come out. And Paul said, well, how do we come to be here? Because they asked these non-specific questions. And then she talked about soldiers rounding up her family in Poland, in Warsaw. And she described all of these events, that it was somewhere in the 40s. Her relatives, I was able to find them, looking them up. I found this woman, Anna Paczynski, had died in Auschwitz. I found a number of Anna Paczynskis who died in Auschwitz, by the way, but I did find that name. And she then describes, her life and how, younger woman and had all these kids and everything, and then they all were taken from her and they were all killed. And here she was trying to comfort other people as they were waiting for these showers to start, but everybody knew that's not what was happening. It was one of those things, they weren't talking about it. Right. And then she described her time. And then Paul said, where are we now? And she said, well, I'm pulling away and I'm on my way home. And then she described going a much happier journey to see her spirit guide and to sort of reconnect with some of her soul group and those wonderful feelings. And then she gets to her council of elders, and this is where you get to do life reviews. And she was there, and she said in front of them, in her mind's eye, why? Why did I choose this difficult life? Everything I loved was taken from me. Why would I choose such a difficult journey? And then she said, oh, they're showing me images. I know this is going to be hard to understand, but they're showing me that it was harder to choose the role of a perpetrator than a victim in this lifetime. Mm. And my head shot up from the camera. Easily the most politically incorrect thing I'd ever heard in my life. It was like a hammer to my head, because it was like, what did she just say? It was it was harder to be a Nazi than to play the victim. Wow.
Right.
That's pretty intense. And then I heard it over and over and over again in sessions where people would say, but these things played out on a daily basis, difficult choices every day. The choices are about loyalty, about compassion. You go through, the history of the planet, from the Romans, from the Greeks, from all of these raiding Genghis Khan, who tore up Asia, thousands and millions of people dying in terrible, difficult ways. Every day, another lesson in compassion and loyalty and forgiveness and letting go. So it's not to belittle in any way a person's suffering, but it's to re-examine what suffering is. If we can see that the stones in our path, as difficult as they are actually stones that we can step on to learn from, so we can get to where we want to go. So we can become more whole, or more compassionate, or more loving, or more full of grace. It's pretty profound stuff, and it's not for everybody. And again, it's not a philosophy. I'm just reporting what people say under hypnosis.
So your second session?
So, all right, well, let's go. So now here I am in my first session, and I'm in front of my council of elders, and I brought my list of questions. And like I say, I had a ringer in there, and the ringer was, what's the meaning of Vanam Populatum? Vanam Populatum is a phrase that I heard in my sleep one night, laying here in bed in Santa Monica, and I heard somebody whisper in my ear, Vanam Populatum. And I got up, what? What is that? Excuse me? I wrote it down, and then I forgot about it for a week or two. And then I saw it on a little pad of paper. Oh, I wrote that down, Vanam Populatum. I wonder what that means. So I took it down into the computer and typed in Vanam. Oh, it's Latin. That's interesting. Vanam in Latin means vanity. Populatum, what does that mean? To annihilate completely, to utterly destroy, to wipe off the face of the earth. Okay, someone's speaking to me in Latin and telling me to annihilate vanity. I mean, I live in L.A. Where do I begin? But the other thing was, is why, and then I was like, I really was thinking about, like, who was talking to me, and I had a sense that it was me talking to me. Some older version of me was talking to me. And then I thought, oh, maybe I was a Roman in a past life, which I found out later on in another session. But in this particular moment, I'm saying, but why would I talk to myself in a language I don't speak? I mean, I speak Italian, but I never took Latin. So it was a conundrum until I actually, and also it's very close to Zen Buddhism, destroy the ego. That concept, which of course means destroy the ego, because it's not a fixed thing. It's a relative thing. The ego is always changing. So the self is always changing, destroy the self. So it's really more of a way to meditate on something. However, in this case, it means something very specific. Destroy the things of the ego. Looks and cars and money and fame, all that stuff. That's vanity. Annihilate it. Wow, okay. So I set that aside, and now here I'm going to do the session. I thought, great. There is no person on the planet who knows the meaning to Vanam Populatum. So now we get to the point where I go to classrooms. I'm in my session, and the hypnotherapist says, where do you want to go? I say, I want to go see Luana. And I'm in a classroom. Everyone's dressed in white. And it was interesting because there she was speaking to me as I knew her, and a sense of humor, looking younger than when I met her, like in her 20s. It's very profound, being able to see her, hold her hand, look her in the eye. I had accomplished what I was setting out to do. But now we go to my council of elders, and I see 8 individuals up there, and they're male and female, and one of them speaks. That's generally how it always works. And so the question was, what's the meaning of Vanam Populatum? And they all laughed. They all roared with laughter, and the lead guy says, why don't you ask Rich? He knows the answer to that. And while he said that, I saw an image of myself lying on the couch up off to the right, like a cartoon image, lying there in front of the therapist. And I realized 2 things in that moment. He didn't say, you already know the answer to that. He said, Rich does. So he was talking about the temporary version of myself. But he was talking to the, not eternal, because we're always learning, we're always growing, but the relatively higher version of myself. Okay? The guy standing in front of them. And the second thing I realized in that moment was that I, the higher version of myself, had given Rich a puzzle, that knowing that he likes puzzles, and that he would go and look it up on Google, and by looking it up, he would learn it. He would hear it. Because if it had just been whispered in his ear, it would have gone in one ear and out the other. But by whispering it in Latin, it forced him to confront it. What does it mean? And, wow, that was a pretty profound thing. But anyway, so I had a whole list of questions. And when you get to the last question, it's really the one that relates to you guys, and it relates to the people listening in. And it's the question, why did I choose myself? And the answer was, every thought, action, word, deed contains energy. And you can use it as a healing energy. So you sing a song, you write a poem, you write a book, you do a radio show, you make a film. You can heal people with that. Laughter is the fastest way because you can change someone's disposition instantly through laughter. I said tears are the same, however, they require catharsis. I thought that was kind of unusual because I don't think I've ever used catharsis in a sentence, but I had access to a lot of information when I was talking. Almost like if the dictionary was open. So, tears work the same way. You just need catharsis. And then I said, but it's rich because as a filmmaker, I thought this was an outside-the-box way for him to use healing energy to change people's lives, to help them, to heal them. And then I paused and said, it's just he's not very good at it. And then I got this laugh from my counselor and from the hypnotherapist, because otherwise you'd know, well, Rich Martini, I mean, I've written and directed eight films, 8 feature, length films and movies and stuff like that. Nobody, but, that was the joke. And I said it, but it was weird because I got laughs from the counsel and from the hypnotherapist. So it's the only time I've ever gotten a laugh from 2 different planes at the same time. And then I said, but I have a feeling that's about to change. So I don't know what that meant. Oh, and the one thing that I asked as I was coming back from the session, I said, is there anything I can bring back to the planet to help people, to say something? And the phrase came to my mind, just let go. Let go of fear, let go of anger, let go of resentment. Just let go. All those things that we hold on to that keep us from being our true selves are what we end up letting go of.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah,
yes, it does.
Kind of.
Very profound. And so it is so simple. It is just that simple. We complicate it quite a bit.
Maybe in the next hour we'll talk about it, but I've recently been, like I say, continue the film, I've been gathering together what spirit guides say to people. So, that was my key thing, just let go. But I've got 10 other meditations that, when we get into the next hour, we'll talk about them. But they're basically, to the 10 Commandments. They're 10 meditations, things that you should meditate on. Because these are coming from a spirit guide who's specifically talking to a person. They're not talking for broadcast. Even though sometimes in a session I'm filming, the spirit guide says, you need to write this down, transcribe it, and get it out into the planet. And I think, oh, they're talking to me. But there's 10 different things that, I posted them at richmartini.com and flipsidethebook.com and flipsidethefilm.com. So they're there, and you can meditate on them at any time. But
great. I
don't know how long are we?
We've burned up the first hour.
Really
and
good.
You had your turn, so in the second hour, Ramon and I are going to take our turn and grill you a bit. This is awesome.
Oh, good, excellent.
This is thank you so much for sharing all this with us. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, well, it's not me. It's just somebody else talking to me, so I'm just passing it along. I'm just a reporter.
There we go. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for listening to the first hour. And just like all the other shows, if you hit that member button and join Ramon and I in the 100th Monkey and help support us and everything that we are bringing to you, you can listen to the second hour and all the other second hour content. Anything else, Ramon?
If anybody can donate a used UFO, just asking. You never know.
Why not? You never know.
That's right.
It's tax deductible.
Yeah, well.
I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. Yeah, no, that's it.
All right. Condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance.
The love you deny is the pain you carry.
And we'll see you in the second segment.
At the tone, the time will be 1, 2, 3, 4. Exactly.
stop. Now you got to stop and listen to what I say. Stop and feel that you've been missing along the way. Put aside your petty fight, serve your dignity. You've got to show the heart that you've been hiding and set it free. There's just one door, we're gone wrong. We all need love, and the need to cure for one, the cure for us all. There's an urgent message trying to reach you. Excuse yourself and pick up the call. You gotta pick up the call. It came the same way the very next day. The words they just kept on coming through. Hard to conceive if you believe me. This is what you really want to do. You got to tune into your inner being. Now let it be. You got to activate your inner vision. Now let it see. Cast out the doubt, the mindless chatter. Now let it go. It's time to tap into the heart of the matter. 'Cause don't you know there's just one door in a world gone wrong. We all need love, and if the cure for one is the cure for all, step right up and don't be shy. Excuse yourself and pick up the call. You gotta pick up the call. Now one more time before I go, one last thing you need to know, my friend. You want to keep it complicated, it's really all quite simple in the end. You got to tune into your inner being. Now let it be. You got to activate your inner vision. Now let it see. Cast out the doubt, the mindless chatter. Now let it go. It's time to tap into the heart of the matter. 'Cause don't you know there's just one door in a world gone wrong. We all need love, and if the cure for one is the cure for us all, step right up and don't be shy. Got to look yourself right in the eye. There's a magic moment trying to meet you, an urgent message trying to reach you. The phone is ringing off the wall, so pick up the call. You gotta pick up the call.